create. This is a time to create.
Hey, welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast presented by Hippo Direct. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur or innovator every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Branstetter, podcasting dude at Hippo Direct, and you can reach me at max@hippodirect.com to help bring your podcast to life and use it as a marketing tool. This is episode number 106, and today's guest is Marcus Whitney. He has a hell of a story, which over the past couple decades has taken him from being a college dropout, moving to a new city without a job, to co-founding multiple healthcare startups, including a game-changing venture fund, bringing an MLS team to Nashville, and then releasing his #1 Amazon bestseller, Create and Orchestrate. He has so many incredible entrepreneurship lessons, business lessons, life lessons, and more, and has one crazy cool perspective on life. It's Marcus Whitney. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with the man who does seemingly everything and does it exceptionally well, Marcus Whitney. Marcus, how you doing today? Welcome.
I'm good, Max, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. All right, so this has been a great conversation. No, I'm just kidding. So we've been connected. I've been following your story on LinkedIn for the longest time, it seems like, and I feel like every time I check in and see the latest and greatest thing you're up to, it's something else and something incredibly exciting. So we're going to get to plenty through your super inspiring career today. Before we get into that, I think it's really important to take a step back to around the year 2000 when you showed up in Nashville. Can you take us into that moment, what your life looked like back then?
Yeah, of course. The year 2000, I arrived in Nashville on Labor Day. It was me, my wife at the time, our 1-year-old, and she was pregnant. And we were in a Mazda 626 and had everything that we owned in the world in that car. Drove into town. I'm wearing a uniform for Rio Bravo Cantina, which is a Tex-Mex chain of restaurants, probably now, I think, better known as Chewy's. And I was looking for work, and we rolled into Broadway, which is in downtown Nashville, rolled up to a Rio Bravo that we saw. You know, back then, this is 2000, so you got to remember, like, for context, there's no smartphones, right? So it's not like I was, on my iPhone looking at what was there. We just drove into town, we're looking around, and see a Rio Bravo, tell her stop. I jump out, and they're slammed, and I say, hey, I'm in the system, because we had driven from Atlanta, where I had previously worked at Rio Bravo, and I jumped on the floor and was working in my very first day in town. And while she drove around to try to find us a place to live, which ended up being a week-to-week motel.
Oh my God. What's going through your mind when you're going to this new city? You have your uniform on already, but there's no guarantee that you're going to need a job. You obviously know that you're going to need a job and to support your family as soon as you can, but what's going through your mind there? I mean, is it excitement? Is it doubt? Is it concern? What's going on?
I mean, I think a lot of everything. Emotions were very, very high. We moved to Nashville to try to find some form of community. My parents were living in New York at the time. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, so I didn't really have any family around. And the reason why we moved to Nashville is because her best friend was in Nashville, and she had gone to high school here, so that was going to be our community. And there was just like a lot of energy, a lot of emotion. But also, I have to say, a lot of optimism. We knew that we were willing to work hard and do everything we could to make it work, as long as the city would and the community here would reciprocate. And we found it on day one that they were willing to let in a completely unknown person. When they looked in the system, because it was a corporate computer system, they found my name. So there was that amount of trust there, and I hadn't been fired. They knew that. So, they could kind of like put me out on the floor and see what I could do. But, generally speaking, Nashville really from day one was very, very accepting, welcoming, and as long as I was willing to roll up my sleeves and work, was willing to give me an opportunity to do that. So, it was scary, but it was also a time of a lot of hope, I have to say.
And what was that first moment that you can remember that you kind of felt that overwhelmingly positive vibes and welcoming vibes in Nashville?
I have to say, probably just getting right on the floor. You can tell a lot about a town as a waiter. You know what I mean? Because you get to see the people that live there in an environment where they're relaxing, they're socializing, they're spending time with friends or family or coworkers. And so it was Labor Day, so it was a holiday. So I got to get a good feel for the town on that very first day. Tex-Mex restaurants are a lot of fun. It's people are drinking margaritas and eating lots of chips and salsa. So
You're making me hungry and thirsty as we.
it was a really good introduction. Honestly, it was a really good introduction, and I have this weird masochistic edge where I look back on those days of waiting tables very fondly. Knowing they were super hard. There were days I would come home with no money. Hands always burned, back always hurting. But there is something about that whole thing of just a walking home every day with cash in hand, and b earn what you make. You walk up to the table and it's about the quality of service and the experience that you deliver for that person. And sometimes you get people that are just, it doesn't matter what you do, they're not going to tip you well. But there are many times when your performance directly correlates to sort of what you make. And there's lots of like little micro lessons in there in that experience. So I am always very grateful that I spent several years of my early professional career as a waiter. I think it was really good for perspective and also just understanding deeply the importance of service.
Absolutely. I mean, that's customer service to a T. You're from day one, you're actually meeting with actual customers, and you can see how a lot of the times the way that your service is reflected in how you're compensated and so on. There's so many lessons there. At a certain point, you made the jump from that gig to teaching yourself how to code and getting more into the tech side of things. How did that come about?
Yeah, so for all the fun things that exist about waiting tables, it's not a great. Most of my coworkers were not married, did not have children for the most part, right? Mostly young people, musicians. Where the job is really appropriate for the age and the phase of life and other things they want to do. I was young, I was 24, but I was still a young dad. And so I needed to do something very different. Our living situation was very, very sort of touch and go, week to week motel. You're paying way more than you should for way less than you need. But, it's hard to get a lease, for a great place when you're waiting tables. We did eventually get a nice lease and a little duplex and, get out of that space. But ultimately, I knew we're about to have this baby. We need healthcare. There's all these things. I knew I needed a salary job. I knew I just needed to get out of this situation where every day it was just fight for every dollar you make. So yeah, it was the year 2000. That was the dot-com boom approaching the dot-com bust. There were lots of stories out there around high school kids who were making 80, 90, $100,000. And what I didn't mention was that I was a college dropout. So I didn't have a degree and I'm brand new in this town. So I just sort of quickly wrap my head around this idea that in the middle of the dot-com boom, even in Nashville, Tennessee, if I could teach myself how to code, I could get a job. And the kind of job that would really sort of dramatically change my life from a economic mobility perspective. And so I started working on it. I would go to the bookstore and buy books and take them home and bring them to the restaurant with me in between tables. I'd be reading pages and go home. And I was working like double shifts, so I had to fit it in at night. But teach myself JavaScript, teach myself back then ASP, teach myself Cold Fusion, all these like total Flash technology, all these like really outdated things now. But in 2000, before mobile phones really hit, these were the technologies at the
Yeah,
time.
cutting edge.
Yeah, totally. And taught myself that stuff. And over the course of 8 months, got good enough to start applying for jobs. And the day after my youngest son was born, I got a job offer from a called HealthStream. That was just it was life changing.
Of course, it always happens like that, right? Like it can't just be one major life event at a time. It's got to be a new door opens right when your life completely changes with another child, right?
Dude, it was like someone wrote that for me. You know what I mean? Like a script. When it I just remember the birth of our son was wonderful, and he was healthy, and we were really happy about that. And not really thinking that much about money at the time, but I was in the middle of applying for a lot of different jobs. And then getting that letter in the mail and opening it up and seeing that I got the job was just like unbelievable. I mean, just the way that felt was still I can remember that really vividly because it was a day that completely changed my life.
And that kind of foreshadows some next steps of your career that we'll get into. But in kind of looking at that phase of your life, what's the biggest lesson, the number one lesson you took from those days waiting tables and going back, making sure you had enough to pay for the hotel? What's the biggest lesson you took away from that?
I think honestly, being optimistic and having an incredible work ethic, those are they're super basic things, but they're not that easy to do, quite frankly. I mean, especially when you're being faced with a ton of stress, just this idea of like staying positive, staying optimistic. I got the job at HealthStream, but I had applied at, probably 20 other places, so, getting turned down and really feeling like, wow, this applying for technology jobs with no prior experience and no college degree is not really that great of an idea.
Hey, you're thinking outside the box.
Yeah, but to have it actually land was just about it was just about being optimistic, and being positive. And I think that's ultimately what got me the job. It certainly wasn't the credentials, it was being positive and optimistic in my interview process, right? And then I think hard work. I mean, working 6.5 days a week. So I would work double shifts as often as I could during the week. And then I actually had a second restaurant job on the weekends at a restaurant called Le Peep, which was a brunch space. And so I would,
Gonna say that sounds familiar. I might have
yeah,
actually been.
yeah,
I'm not sure if it was there or a different city, but I've definitely been there before.
yeah. Well, they have them in like Denver and Atlanta, which is where I was at. So they have them in many different cities. But it's a great little brunch place, and you do real well. Le Peep ended up being in a neighborhood in Nashville called Belle Meade. Now I'm new to town. I don't really know where any of these neighborhoods are in terms of like what's the socioeconomic edge to them. Who lives there? What's the makeup of the city? Later I would find out that Belle Meade is, basically the old school wealth neighborhood in Nashville. And so I was waiting tables on the wealthiest families in Nashville. And just, like I knew it, but I didn't really know it. I didn't have context for it. And I actually was waiting on the family that owned HealthStream, the Frist
Oh
family.
wow.
They're one of the big, three or four, depending on how you slice it, families here in Nashville, and they're like the big healthcare family. They started HCA, and HealthStream was started by Bobby Frist. So yeah, it was just one of those things where you had to work really hard. I wasn't on the hiring side, so I don't know how the conversations went, but my belief and understanding is that how I showed up waiting tables somehow got back to the folks at HealthStream, and was part of that decision making process. And I think that's it doesn't matter what you're doing. You just kind of show up and you work hard, and you stay positive and optimistic. And it's like people remember that. You know what I mean? That is something you can parlay across positions, across industries, over many years. Just like the way that you make people feel based on just integrity, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's priceless, and you can't really. It's kind of one of those intangible things you can't lay it out on a chart and say like, hey, you have to be this nice to people in order for good things to happen. But it just there's something about it. There's some magic about it. If you're always focused on being kind and being positive, being optimistic, there's no limit on what it can lead you to. So let's get to your entrepreneurial ventures. After you started getting into different jobs and getting more into the healthcare space, What point did it click for you that, hey, I want to start my own company?
Yeah, so I had multiple false starts.
Throw the flag.
Yeah, man. I mean, I only lasted at Hellstream for a year because they were not a big company when I was there. They're a much bigger company now, but they were publicly traded. So it's a little under 200 people that were there, and man, I had no soft skills. I didn't know, as much as I worked hard and I was positive, I didn't understand office politics. I didn't understand chain of command, and I was out of line in multiple instances, far exceeding my rank or quite frankly my capabilities. It was all just sort of ambition run amok. And so I ended up, leaving for a better job in a smaller company a year later. And these were all sort of the steps towards better understanding who I am, in terms of self-awareness and my personality. This, what I call the ambitious creative rebel type, the person who they're just not satisfied working for anyone else. It's just at the end of the day, and there's no good reason for it, quite frankly. I don't want to say that I'm a bad employee, but it's just sort of the way I'm wired. And so I spent 7 years as a professional technologist. I started at Hellstream, and at the end of that 7 year run, I was the head of technology at an email marketing company called Emma
Yeah.
that was sold to Campaign Monitor, a couple years back. I kind of progressed from Hellstream being the biggest company that I've ever worked at, down to smaller companies. When I started at Emma in 2003, I was the fifth or sixth employee, depending on how you count it. Grew with them up until 50, and kind of as we grew, it was great. I earned equity. I learned more about leadership. I got to grow a team and all that other kind of stuff. But you start making money, and you get to 50 people, and bureaucracy happens, and it gets to be less fun for someone like me. So I headed out of there, and 2007 was the beginning of my venture, my true venture, where I never really looked back into entrepreneurship. And I failed plenty after that, but that was the real jump off point for me.
So that was your non-false start. We'll call 2007 the non-false start. It was the real,
That's right.
the true start.
That's right.
And shout out Emma. That's cool that you were there so early. I mean, still to this day, I get the Emma newsletter in my inbox every week, and it's
Nice.
amazing. I mean, true thought leader in the email marketing space, but it's amazing you carved out such a awesome role for yourself early on there.
Yeah. Again, timing and in my book, we're not jumping to that, but I will just say, like,
We can jump. We can false start if you want. It's okay.
the guy who I had write the forward to my book is Clint Smith, who's the co-founder and original CEO of Emma, and just a really good friend of mine. And being that early in and watching him and his partner Will Weaver, they were the co-CEOs, if you will, for at least the entire time I was there. Watching how they did it, watching how they managed their partnership, how they led. Clint was the first person to teach me like how powerful writing could be for business. Those Emma emails that you're talking about, I mean, that was him. You know what I mean? Like, just him really understanding the power of communication, the power of brand. I learned so much from those guys. And so yeah, when I left, I left on incredibly good terms. Sold my stock back to the company, and got some capital to be able to start what I was doing. Of course, I also ended up getting separated from my wife at that time, so a lot of that stock sell back went to alimony. But that's okay.
Again, another major life moment that times up with another major professional moment.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I just wanted to say Emma was really, really a great 4 year run for me, and very formative. Even to this day, very formative in terms of how I think about business.
And then when you got more into the entrepreneurial space, so you started businesses on the healthcare side, you've started it on the venture capital side, which is really on the healthcare side as well. So kind of multiple levels there. What was the biggest adjustment, and kind of what was your sensation or reaction to finally not working for somebody else? I mean, you're finally in charge. You're finally, calling the shots, kind of like you always felt like you were destined to be, but you never truly had that until this moment. What's that like?
It felt really good, but it's also like another level of responsibility, and I feel like that is so much of what I've learned about since 2007 is you want the freedom, but freedom's not free. You know what I mean? And thank God I had a really strong work ethic and had that disposition that was generally pretty positive and optimistic, because being the boss is a heavy burden. It's lonely and it's very, very hard. And especially when you're inexperienced and you don't understand a lot of the important principles around leadership, specifically in business, you make a ton of really hard mistakes when you hire people. You don't understand how serious that engagement is, and it's like really serious. It's not quite like a marriage or anything, but I mean, people are depending on you, and there's the principal agent problem where they're not the owner, but you think that they should behave like they're an owner, and there's misalignment there. And we also were headed into this window of time where people started to rewrite the rules around what the employer employee relationship should look like. Should an employer be trying to make their employees happy? I mean, these weren't things that were really considered, quite frankly, prior to the 21st century, I would say. And so it was hard. There was a lot to learn, and those lessons came very hard. I did not have great mentors, along the way. Probably my own fault. I didn't have bad mentors. I really just didn't have mentors. I had coworkers. I had people I worked with sometimes that had more experience than me and offered me what they could. But at the end of the day, when you're partnering with somebody, it's like you can't really be mentored by them, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? So because you have to keep your own boundaries with that person. So it just was a lot of hard lessons. That's what I learned. I gained a whole new level of appreciation for Clint and Will, for the people at Hellstream who I didn't treat that well, when I was there as an employee, 'cause I just realized how hard it was. And it's a lot easier when you're not the person, you're not the boss.
Yeah, it's totally different. Such a different mindset there. Would love to dive into some of the stops along the way there. So, a couple of your ventures that come to mind, not to overuse venture the pun, but well, there's your venture fund, which Jumpstart, and then you have your health further. You're in the same ballpark with both of those, but also doing very different things. Which of those two has been more of a challenge to build?
It depends on the timing, right? So they've both been hard and they've both sort of fed each other. So, Jumpstart is a venture fund, and it's really interesting. We're in our sixth year, and man, the first 5 years of any business is like it's just like the first 5 years of life, right? You think about it, like you don't start going to school until you're like 5, 6 years old, right? And so there's this interesting play on chronology there. With a business, it takes you the first 5 years to kind of figure out who you are, but also to be credible. So we have around $46 million under management today. The first year we only could get 1.5 million under management. The next year we got another two under, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, man, it's really, really hard actually to like grow assets under management, and to be credible and to learn how to pick great deals and to manage a portfolio and to do board level work and build relationships that can lead companies into great customer relationships or potential exits, right? Or great partnerships. So just that entire, and for someone like me who's a college dropout, like learning the terminology, learning the structure of a deal, learning about financing terms, so many things, learning about the regulatory space, all the different contracts that are needed, how you actually make money, how you process returns when they come in, there's just so many things that are at play that you have to learn. And so for me, that was really, really difficult. Health Further was more straightforward. It started as a conference, and then it evolved into a strategic advisory once once the brand was solid enough and we had the right level of relationships. But that was hard in a different way. It was very, very hard to throw an event. We're throwing events at the Music City Center, which is a convention center with 2,000 people coming. We're selling tickets, selling sponsorships. We're handling all the food and beverage and trade floors and speakers and agendas and digital apps, and just a nightmarish amount of work. Unbelievably terrible amount of work.
I like that word nightmarish, by the way. That's I don't think you could describe it more vividly.
Oh, it's brutal. For quite frankly, like very little profit. You know what I mean? Like it's not a
Right.
highly profitable business. What it is a very leverageable business because at the end, you are the convener. You have this network. You have learned so much. You're building the brand. You're the connector. So, that's why you do something like that. And after 4 years, I just got tired of the event part of it and said, let's just do the advisory piece. And that was easy and hard. Like, so it was easy to get the first couple of contracts in place, and then hard to scale because there are other companies that have been doing this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and you're the new person on the block. So again, you kind of go back to square one of everything is hard and how do you stand out? And when you haven't done something before, who's going to be the early adopter to trust you and give you a shot at it? So everything has got its difficulties to it. I will say, what makes things easier over time, and this has been a really interesting year for me to sort of to feel that over time things get easier because I'm more credible. It's like you reached out to me and you're like, okay, dude, you've done like XYZ, I'd love to have you on the show.
That's exactly what I said, by the way.
Basically, right? And like 5 years ago, you wouldn't have said that, right? Because there was no soccer. I didn't have any funds under management. I hadn't thrown health further. The Emma thing would have been sort of the only thing. So you get to this point where the body of work sort of speaks for itself, and your lead time on closing a deal or trying to get to a point of credibility shrinks. And thank God for that, because you get older, you don't have the energy or the time for that. You know what I mean? So like, you know,
Yeah, especially when you're spending years putting together giant events and working on dozens of millions of venture deals.
exactly. That doesn't that listen, and this is the important part. That, by the way, like, doesn't make you that rich. You know what I'm saying? Like the venture business takes 7 to 10 years to mature, to actually like return proper wealth to the general partner. So first 3 4 years, you're not getting rich off that. You're not getting rich off the conference. You're not getting rich off of a soccer team, because that takes hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. So like, what are you really doing? You're setting up a platform for the future. You know what I mean? You're setting up a
Yeah,
platform for the future that you can then leverage. And so, quite frankly, that's where I am. I'm at this point where I've got ownership in these entities. They're built, they're up and running, they're viable. I've got a book, I've got a podcast. I've like got all the stuff. And now, and I want to be like super transparent with people about that stuff. Like, I own a house, and I'm not broke. My kids go to college, and like I'm fine. But like, like we're not rolling in it. You know what I mean? Like, it's like I've got assets. These assets still have to mature.
right.
I've still got work I've got to do out here, man. And yeah, I got a DM the other day from somebody who was like, hey, I see you. You're so connected here in Nashville. How can I really, break into the fold? And so I asked the person, like, hey, how long have you been here? And they're like, a couple of months, but I'm here for good now. And I'm like, okay, awesome. So it took me 3 years to get my first meaningful position, 7 years for my name to mean anything. My name had no value in Nashville until I left Emma. It took me 7 years. It's like,
Yeah, it's really crazy to take a step back and think about that. And I think no matter what you're doing, the more years of experience you have under your belt, or the more kind of different chapters of different experiences you have, it just adds such another level of credibility, especially when you have the mindset that you have, like the entrepreneurial, the optimist. And I can get a sense of the masochist side of kind of always going after the challenge or the hard thing, years and years of hard lessons, hard learning. And so it really does take a lot of patience to go along with everything. And so you're truly exemplifying that. When you look at those businesses in the healthcare space and how much you've grown, I mean, you mentioned the numbers on the venture fund side, but also, how you've pivoted from having in-person events to the more advisory side. What is the top business growth lesson that comes to mind from leading the charge with both of those businesses?
you do a lot of different things when you're first starting because you have no idea what's going to stick. So your energy is kind of dispersed across many different things. And over time, you have to whittle that down to the things that work. And then you have to maximize the things that work to yield as much as they possibly can for you. that's what we've done. I mean, when Vic and I first started Jumpstart, I mean, we were doing all sorts of stuff. And it was like, I can't even run through the list, but like, in addition to our first fund that we were raising and deploying and managing, we also had other revenue generating projects that we were doing that were not core at all to what we were doing, but like we didn't know what we were doing yet. We were just sort of out there hustling. We're hustling.
Yeah.
And over time, you start realizing, okay, the hustle is good. It helps you figure out who you are, who you want to be when you grow up, what works, what doesn't. But you got to know when to put that stuff away. And you got to know when to kind of, make the main thing the main thing. And then when you understand what the main thing is, then you got to like understand how to maximize it, right? Like what is the growth path for the main thing? And so, it's how do you go from like 1.5 million to, let's call it 3.5 million raised to like 6 million to 30 million, right? You make a strategic decision to raise a different kind of fund, right? And you use the brand and the credibility and all the other stuff that you did to build a story that makes sense for that next level fund to happen. That's it. That's the thing that you do over time is you whittle away the things that are not core. You get the core, you make the core, and then you figure out how to actually grow it and maximize it.
In a kind of natural next step, and by that I mean not natural whatsoever, but completely awesome. Your, I'll call it entrepreneurial ventures in the professional soccer space. And for anyone who's not familiar, you're part of the team that really rallied around Nashville from a soccer standpoint and ultimately helped bring a soccer team, an MLS team, to Nashville. So Nashville Soccer Club. First of all, congratulations on that. I'm sure that's was so much time in the works and actually making it happen. When you were younger, or even when you were starting off your career, did you have aspirations to be involved from the professional sports or professional soccer standpoint?
Absolutely not. It was not at all anything I was thinking about. So, one of the things that I did a lot that helped build the credibility was I involved myself in a variety of different community initiatives. And some bucket of that would be just kind of the nonprofit space. So, sitting on boards, Habitat for Humanity, the Library Foundation, things like that, right? I'm a Metro Arts Commissioner, so that's like a mayor appointed position, working with the arts agency for the city. So I do those kinds of things, and soccer actually really landed in my lap through that. We had a nonprofit, community-based organization called Nashville Football Club, that started 5.5 years ago, and seeking to fill the space that was left by our pro-am fourth division soccer team, the Nashville Metros, that had lived a multi-decade life, but the owners had to sort of shut it down. And so I started just as a member. I paid my dues like everybody else. The first year it was up and running, went from just a five-a-side fun family neighborhood thing to acquiring a franchise in the fourth division with the National Premier Soccer League and playing a season and making it to the playoffs and drawing 1,000 to 2,000 people per match. And so off of that momentum, the founder, Chris Jones, and I, we kept having a email dialogue about how well it was going and if I could be helpful. One day he asked me out to lunch and said, listen, this thing was like lightning in a bottle. I could use your help to really, maximize it. I've got this board, we're hard workers, but like, we just don't understand how to like scale a venture. So, can you come in and help us with that? So I said, yes, bring me on the board. So they did. They made me the chairperson, chairman of the board. And from there, everything just sort of went 1,000 miles an hour. I joined the board. The first things I was doing was just basic stuff like looking at trademarks, IPs, what was our e-commerce system, how are we doing member management, the basics, right? But also establishing a vision that we could make it to the major league, level. We had a story that popped out in our local newspaper, the Tennessean here, probably 6 months after I started as a chairperson, that said that an outside group was looking at bringing professional soccer to Nashville. It wasn't major league level. It was in a league called the United Soccer League. At the time was third division, now is second division soccer. We had to sort of respond to that. And so we did. We responded publicly and said, look, if professional soccer is going to happen here, we're going to do it. And that just started the process. We started talking to our members about, would you guys be supportive if we went this direction? Because if you go pro, you can't really be a nonprofit anymore. You have to kind of turn into a for-profit entity. It helped that I had already been doing Jumpstart, so I understood a lot about how to pitch for investment, for private investment, and how to like put together that pitch deck and how to have a hold a pitch event. So that's what I did. I just put together a pitch event, put together a pitch deck, and we pitched to local investors, and we met David Dill, who then was the president of LifePoint Health. Today he's the CEO, and he stepped up as the lead investor. He brought along a very good family friend and a great entrepreneur along with him, Chris Redditch. And so those guys signed up, and then through the talks, they said that they really wanted me to be part of the ownership group. So we negotiated all that stuff with the organization. I stepped down as the chairman and joined the ownership group, and then we closed the deal. And we got a franchise in the United Soccer League, which at that point was second division. So we were set to play. And then Major League Soccer opened up their expansion news and said, we're going to add 4 more teams. Local billionaire John Ingram decided he wanted to go for it. And I knew John and I sat on the board of the Nashville Entrepreneur Center together, and John was an investor in Jumpstart. So, it's like being involved in the community at least opened the door for us to have a conversation. Very long, thoughtful negotiation. And we ended up selling a majority of our club to him in exchange for percentage of the Major League Soccer team in the event that we were actually able to get it closed. And then we did. And so we kind of went in as one happy family to make a Major League Soccer bid, and we got it done. We were the first expansion team, so we played 2 seasons in the United Soccer League, which was fun, and was grateful for that. And this was, supposed to be our first season in Major League Soccer, but, the pandemic's had better plans for everybody. So sort of dealing with all of that craziness, but still at the end of the day, we're grateful to be here in the game.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's got to be so cool and different to have a leadership role in the sports world as well as in the business world. You kind of got a hybrid there. What's the biggest difference you notice about working with professional sports versus other areas of professional life?
How many misconceptions there are around the idea that somehow professional sports are not a business. All these clubs are run by CEOs with front offices that have, a head of operations, a head of marketing, you know what I mean? Like, legal. What I did was the ownership piece, but like, I'm not really that involved. There's a full organization of very experienced sports professionals where this is what they went to school for. And, they've been working at various clubs in different leagues for their entire career. And that was the part I had no idea about. I didn't understand it's an industry like everything else, and that people are skilled and experienced and well-traveled and know what they're doing. And it's not a joke. It's not a joke. And the money is there because of high performing people. And so that was the big thing for me, was just, hiring the very first CEO and just realizing, wow, we hired somebody from the league office, the Major League Soccer office, who had been running international soccer for them for years, to come run our club. And that was actually a step up for him because, he got the opportunity to be a CEO, whereas he wasn't going to be the CEO of Major League Soccer. So it was a step up in his career. And then when we went to Major League Soccer, John recruited Ian Ayre, who was who was the CEO of Liverpool, the most recent Champions League and Premier League champions. And so that's our CEO. Our CEO is the former CEO of Liverpool, who brought Jurgen Klopp there. So
that's amazing.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. So like, and now he's a friend, and he's just like a normal guy. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, he's not a normal guy, but he's a normal guy, man. You know what I mean? Like, and I think I think that is the part of all of this that has been the most surprising, but surprising in a really good way. You know what I mean? Is just understanding it's not that different, but people on the outside don't get that because it's so mystical, right? Sports business. And so they'll come and ask me for like a million things. And I'm like, I don't do any of this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I have no control over it. And quite frankly, like, and John Ingram, who's the majority owner, like, he doesn't have any control. Like, he's hired a great team of like very seasoned, experienced professionals, and they run the club. You know what I mean? Like, John's not in there helicoptering and telling everybody what to do all the time. He's hired great people. They run the club every day. just like you would run, just like we run our businesses.
Absolutely. And I think as a sports fan, it's so easy to get into that trap of just because it's a thing that it's so easy to get passionate about that you think about it on the sports level or the entertainment level, or for some, it's kind of that level of escapism. But there's always that business side of thing that's underlying everything. And so it's always good to remind yourself that, hey, there's there's way more that goes into this than just what's happening on the field or the pitch. And so much of what we've talked about, you have talked about or alluded to in your book, Create and Orchestrate, which congrats on being a number one Amazon bestseller. That's amazing. Out of the gate there, I know the reviews for the book are just blowing up. And this is something that I think is so cool because not only were you writing the book for years and years, and this is something that you were thinking about for a while. I mean, it has stories that basically have come from your lifetime. So it's really like you've been working for this book your whole life. What has that experience been like, actually putting pen to paper and sharing the lessons that you've learned in book form, and then finally and ultimately releasing something that you've been working on for so long?
I don't want to speak in hyperbole, but I do think this is the hardest thing I've ever done. Completing this book, very, 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 very difficult. Very difficult. It took me 5 years, and it wasn't 5 straight years. There was a year where I like didn't write. You know what I mean? Because some of the stuff I was going through was really difficult and sort of made me question whether or not I was the person to write the book, whether or not I felt the same way I did when I started the book about entrepreneurship. So, it was kind of one of those turn me inside out experiences. Having said that, I just told my wife this morning that I think everybody should write a book. It's difficult, but man, when you get on the other side of it, there are just very few things that you can do that are so meaningful. And it's not for money. It's just this idea that you take the time to organize your thoughts and your beliefs and your experiences into something that anyone can buy for $6.99 digitally and have immediately and could potentially change your life. You know what I mean? It's like the best, it really is the best deal on earth, like a book.
Yeah.
Now having trudged through the process of getting one out the door and knowing that people can buy this thing for $7, or they can get the really fancy, hard cover edition for 25. Okay, fine. It's just like the best deal ever. You know what I mean? Because it's like my blood is in this book, like for real. This is the book. I wrote the book I wish I had. When in 2007 when I left Emma, this is the book I wish I had. That I believe would have helped me to do better and to run into less brick walls. And so I just think writing a book is a very difficult and very fulfilling thing. I'm so glad I did it. I'm so grateful for the response I've received and for the impact it's already made in such a short time. And I'm looking forward to getting it in more people's hands and hopefully changing more people's lives with it.
And that's the fun part, right?
Yeah.
It's something that you've been working on so much. I was actually thinking of asking you what's the hardest thing you've ever done, and without me even asking, you've answered that. So, but there are lots of lessons in the book, hard lessons, as you talked about. What is the biggest lesson that you hope that you really, really instill in the minds of readers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the core thing is that this whole entrepreneurship thing is ultimately a journey and is not about a destination. And it's really about your mindset as you take this journey on. So there's like, there's several kind of mindsets that I try to articulate throughout the book. There's the mindset of the hustler hacker hero that I try to articulate. There's the mindset of orchestration. There's the mindset of partnership. There's the mindset of leadership. These are all mindsets that I try to kind of pull out and shine a light on because they're really, really important. They're multidimensional and they help you in a myriad of different situations. But ultimately this is a journey, right? It's like I wrote this book about 20 years of my life, and Max, I'm 44. Like, dude, I'm young. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Even in the context of like an entrepreneur's career, I'm young. young. I got two more of those in me.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? And so like that's the thing. It's like this is a journey and God willing, if you're healthy, you're going to live for a while. And so, don't be in such a huge rush to like get something done and understand like there are different things at different phases. You are where you are, wherever phase you're at, that's where you're at and that's totally cool. You won't be there forever, so try to enjoy it, but try to act as skillfully as you can in that moment, because how you act in that moment will impact that next moment that you're going to have. So focus on developing those skills, technical skills, sure, but also those mindset skills, those skills around leadership, those skills around orchestration, those skills around how to structure and design a business, those skills around how to kind of hack clever new pathways for yourself. Those are all sort of the things.
And it's such a powerful message. So, congrats again. I really appreciate you putting it all in book form. I know it's something that you might have, yeah, maybe worked on for more than just 1 or 2 hours. So, got to feel good to put it out there.
It does.
As Marcus said, it is a journey. Nothing happens overnight. And something that would be awesome for you to have on your journey is a banging podcast. How awesome would that be to have a podcast you update every week, every 2 weeks, whenever you want to send out new episodes that helps promote your brand, helps connect you with amazing people, can even lead to business results. Even better, how would you like a high quality, professionally produced podcast that you don't have to take the time yourself to go through every single week and edit? That's what I'm here for. You can email me at max@hippodirect.com. I will help you save time with your podcast as well as produce that high quality, professionally sounding podcast that you're looking for. Email me at max@hippodirect.com. Let's bring your podcast to life. Now, back to Marcus, who's going to tell you a little bit more about his journey and something really cool he came across online. So let's get to a fan favorite segment called the Wild Business Shoutout of the Week.
The Wild Business Shoutout of the Week!
Wild Business Shout of the Week. This is where we talk about a brand or campaign that's doing something really breakthrough. And you may have heard about it or you may not have, but if you have heard about it, there's some very passionate chatter about it. Clubhouse. Marcus, can you take us through kind of a brief background of how you heard about Clubhouse and what excites you about it?
Yeah, man. Clubhouse is really interesting. I started seeing Clubhouse on Twitter, people talking about Clubhouse on Twitter. I follow this guy on Twitter. His name is Web Smith, and his Twitter handle is @Web. He's basically the smartest guy online about e-commerce out there. He has a publication called 2 p.m. It's just brilliant, and I believe big time in e-commerce. And so I follow him and I listen to what he says. And, he started talking about these Clubhouse conversations that he was in and, sharing screenshots and stuff like this. And this was months ago. It was during the pandemic, but it was still months ago. And I was just like, what is this thing? So I started like Googling it and finding out that it's this like invite only Silicon Valley thing, which, kind of made my eyes roll, to be completely honest with you.
I think that's everybody's reaction at first is kind of,
Yeah,
there's some uncertainty there. Like, okay, what is this?
totally. Like it definitely made my eyes roll. But, some of the screenshots were showing, these conversations where like Webb was in a room with, I don't know, Mark Andreessen and like Oprah, you know what I mean? And you're like, what is going on here? You know what I mean? Like who doing what? And, over time, what I came to understand is Clubhouse is an audio chat app. And I wouldn't have even understood what that was like until I actually got in. But it's this audio chat app where it's invite only. The invites are very, very infrequently given out. So it's a very sort of well managed group of people who are given access, but it is ultimately referral based, but people don't have a ton of invites to give. There's no official website that you can go to get it, and it's not even in the app store, so it's test flight only. Like you can't even like download it and like have it on your phone. It's only on test flight. You got to get an invite to get access to the test flight app, the whole thing. And so this whole idea of doing this very extended, exclusive public beta, right, where the people who have been on there are just like, this is life changing. And then here's the punchline: is I got on probably 3 weeks ago. And man, I didn't turn it off for a week. It replaced my podcast listening, because here's the thing, you don't have to be engaged in the chat. They call it step up to the stage. So you can go into a room and you can just listen to a conversation. You don't have to actually engage in the conversation. And man, these conversations are unbelievable. Sometimes there's 2 people, sometimes there's 20 people on the stage, and these conversations are unbelievable. You never know who you're going to hear from. One night I'm just like hanging out on there and jumped into this room, and Virgil Abloh, who's the black creative director for Louis Vuitton, was on there just talking about his whole experience of doing that, and just talking with a bunch of other people who I didn't know. But that was even more cool, right? It's just that there's one well-named person in there, and the rest. I was in there. There's this club called Casa Club where they're always speaking Spanish, and Tiffany Haddish was in there, and they were all just like talking about these Spanish sayings across different nationalities. So like these in Spain, here's a Spanish saying, or in Mexico, here's a Spanish saying, or you know what I mean. And like Tiffany's just in there like cracking jokes and like trying to guess what things mean. And it's just crazy. It's crazy. They have these like dinner clubs on Saturday nights that Felicia Horowitz, who's Ben Horowitz's wife, hosts, and these incredibly deep, awesome conversations. So, I can now say it exceeded what I thought it was going to deliver now that I'm on the inside. I don't have an invite to give to anybody.
Thank you. That was my next question.
Yeah, I don't. I don't have an invite. So I got in, but I can't get anybody else in. They're building a very loyal following of people who are rabid fans that, man, whenever this thing does explode, I think the growth is going to be, one for the record books. Honestly, they're dialing in the product really well. So like if you're inside, you're getting all these new releases, 3 times a week, and the features are meaningful when they release them. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting. We've seen this before in different flavors, but this is a public beta release, kind of unlike anything I've ever seen.
And I think that's the big question, right? Are they going to be able to keep that level of exclusivity, or this really previously unseen access to hearing directly from some of the biggest and most influential names out there as they scale? So that's going to be really interesting to see, especially once, they give you referral access and you can refer me. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But I was cracking up when you brought up Clubhouse, because shout out my friend Mike Orden in Australia, who in a previous Zoom call that my buddy Alex and I had with him earlier in the pandemic, we were just chatting about things. And I think legitimately half of the call, this call lasted for 3 hours, and half the call he was talking about Clubhouse. And he literally said the same thing, that, look, when I discovered this, it literally took over my time that I would usually spend listening to podcasts or watching Netflix, like all my social media apps. It literally consumed his life because it was so interesting. And clearly that's happened to you, or at least for a little bit as well. So there's clearly something to it. So it'll be really interesting to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, no, there is no question there is something to it. And the conversations are truly fantastic. They really are. I think it's going to be big. I think it's going to be big. I think they are going to have to figure out the scale part of it and how that's all going to work.
Yeah.
Now, because it is so small, you're very free to kind of move in and around and get access to everything. And that will be interesting to see how they handle that part of it.
Let's wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right, let's get wild. So we're going to talk about Clubhouse. No, I'm just kidding. So who is your favorite, before you're involved in ownership, obviously?
Yeah.
Maybe growing up, who's your favorite soccer player of all time?
Pele.
Heard of him. When you were waiting tables, I'm sure there's at least one meal that comes to mind that smelled so good every time that it was hard not to take a bite on the way to the table. What meal is that comes to mind?
Oh man, it would have to be, something from Rio Bravo, and probably fajitas, just because like when you bring them out, the steam is like running up your nose. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
brings a tear to your eye.
Yeah. The fajitas were always kind of tough, and if you ended up selling a bunch of those, by the end of the day, you wanted one for sure.
That's a great answer. And I think fajitas, now that I think of it, to this day, it's one of the only meals that When a server walks it out or runs it out to the table, everybody turns their head, and you don't see that too often. Literally, everybody in the restaurant is turning their head because the steam is or smoke is going up in the air. So that's a
Exactly.
good one.
And the sizzle too, right? The sizzle's a big part of it. The sound.
Absolutely. Oh, gotta love that sizzle. What activity or hobby do you have that when you're doing it, it makes you feel most creative or good time for brainstorming or ideating?
It's not really supposed to be this, but meditation. So I meditate about 20 minutes a day, and
Not 20 hours?
no, I recalibrated.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
20 minutes a
I
day.
think like koala bears kind of do that, but other than that,
I only do 20 minutes a day, but I went to a meditation retreat, and it was great because it was very freeing, because I think a lot of people struggle with meditation just because they feel like they're not doing it right. One of the things that I learned at this retreat was the importance of being dispassionate, which is really like not caring about how it's going, just like doing it. Right. You know what I mean? It's like you need to be disciplined and dispassionate. So the discipline is like you sit down on the cushion every day and you put in your 20, 40 minutes, whatever, 10 minutes, if that's what you get, what you have time for. But the dispassionate piece is, yes, there's a way to breathe, and you're supposed to like try to be in the moment and all this other kind of stuff. But for me, part of it is just like letting my brain wind down and letting the ideas sort of form in the bridge between my subconscious and my conscious, to kind of clear things out so that there's no anxiety around those things. So that's why I like 20 minutes, because I can kind of take the first 7 to 8 minutes and be totally dispassionate about quote unquote how well I'm meditating, and just let all these, like, I don't go in with an agenda, but I just let my brain run for a minute. And it's nice. Things just sort of like settle in and make sense. And I get this really good brainstorming stuff. And then, like, I'm kind of tired of that. You know what I mean? And I just kind of go, oh, yeah, my breath. And then I return to my breath. And then usually for like the final 12 minutes, it's like this really fantastic, wonderful, deep, effortless meditation, because like I didn't try to fight to avoid the thinking part, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a long answer. It's not very rapid, but that
well,
is
I did start meditating in the second half of that answer, but besides that, it was very good. No, that's all. It's cool how you kind of can feel that transition to the effortless portion there.
yeah.
And then, what is a weird talent you have? So maybe it's a random talent. It could be like a body trick or a memory trick, but it has absolutely no impact on your business. But for whatever reason, you're just really good at it.
Ooh. Oh, I'm a really good rapper.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, but like that, it does nothing for me. Like I can't use it in any meaning.
Have you ever done it like as part of your podcast or on one of your live sessions or anything?
No, because it's because like I'm a good rapper in like a legitimate sense, right? And so if I use it in any of these other formats, it actually kind of like screws with it. You know what I'm saying? Like if I'm with my friends from college, and we're just sort of hanging out, and we just sort of jump into a freestyle cipher, that's totally cool. But like me using it in a podcast, it's kind of like a parody of it. And so like that's why I don't use it, because I like to keep it as pure as I possibly can. That like I really appreciate and love hip hop music. I wouldn't want to be on the record as like kind of cheapening it, you know what I'm saying, and making it like a I don't know, a commercial or something like that for, hey, here's Marcus, the venture capital guy who also raps, and listen to him rap. So yeah, so I basically can never use it because I never want to, sort of cheapen the art form.
I see what you mean there. Well, we'll take the Clubhouse approach and make your listening to your rapping is referral or invite only. So only,
Only.
only only select few can hear it. But that begs another question: who's your favorite rapper of all time besides yourself?
I'm definitely not my favorite rapper of all time. So that's easy, man. It is. It's a really really difficult one, but I would say all in all, for the entire catalog and everything that they've been able to accomplish, probably Jay-Z. Just
Yeah,
just hard to kind of top that longevity, the level of quality, the execution. And he's from Brooklyn and I'm from Brooklyn, so I just think it's hard to get better than him in my book.
there you go. Yeah, it's hard to be any more iconic than that, and the
Pretty hard.
consistency among the album, absolutely crazy. So, Marcus, thank you so much for rapping. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much for sharing your amazing stories and lessons. And I literally get chills listening to you. So it's just really appreciate everything you've done and how you've now put it in book form and sharing your story and inspiration with so many others. Where is the best place for people to connect with you and to buy your book?
MarcusWhitney.com. That's it, man. It's simple, straightforward. You can sign up for my email list there. If you go there right now, there's a big old banner that says "Create and Orchestrate, #1 Amazon bestseller. Click here to buy it." You can buy it on Amazon. You could buy it. You could buy signed copies from my store, creativepower.co. But if you just go to my website, like everything I'm doing is there. MarcusWhitney.com.
Love it. Easy enough. And then last thing, final thoughts. It could be a line from a Jay-Z song, which has actually been on this podcast before. Not Jay-Z, but a line from a song as part of final thoughts. Or it could be literally anything you want, a quote, kind of a motto, whatever you want. Final thoughts, send us off here.
Yeah, my final thought, and this has kind of been my thought for the year, is build the new normal. I don't want anyone to walk away from this conversation, where we didn't really talk about the pandemic, to not understand this is still happening in the context of the pandemic. And this pandemic is a world changing moment, and it's a super super special moment. It's difficult, it's hard, it's challenging, but it is in many ways going to birth an entirely new world. Man, you have an opportunity. You're living in this moment. If you can stay healthy, stay positive, and get your bills paid, you might have an opportunity to like build what the new world is going to look like. So I would just say, try to keep the news to a minimum. Stay well informed, don't be ignorant, but create. This is a time to create. The number of opportunities that are emerging right now are unbelievable. And so this is a time, like, you don't have to let the new normal happen to you. You can build it.
Create, create, create. Thank you, Marcus, for sharing your truly incredible story and lessons. And thank you, Wild listeners, for tuning into another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite app and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also check us out on Good Pods, where you can find all the favorite podcasts your friends, family, and other favorite people, pretty much everybody in the world, is listening to. You can find out how Hippo Direct can help you at hippodirect.com. And, of course, connect with us on your favorite social media platform, (S), at Hippo Direct and Max Branstetter. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!